If you go horseback riding in the Caucasus, remember one thing: you can't take along much luggage. Ideally, everything should fit in one bag. There's not much room on a horse's back. We set off from Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. There's no time for sightseeing. We'll be in the saddle for 8 days, and our trek is more important than any tours we could take through the city. Chuicha, our Georgian guide, will be with us the entire time. Meet Adam, Krzysztof and Wojtek, 3 friends from Poland. And just like me, horse fanatics looking for adventure. It's around 100 kilometers to our first stop, in the region of Tusheti on the border of Chechnya. We've been forewarned. The drive will take at least 6 to 7 hours, and we'll soon find out why. At first, Chuicha keeps a pretty swift pace. Everything seems a bit chaotic, but we're not very surprised about that. We've requested some Georgian music to get to know the country a little better. Chuicha only speaks Georgian, which makes it hard to communicate. But one thing's for sure: behind the wheel, he's got a lead foot. Is this a taste of what's to come? We, of course, wanted to know why his steering wheel is on the right. His vehicle was shipped directly from Japan, where cars drive on the left side of the road. Adam, on the left by the window, organized our trip. He's traveled on horseback through several Eastern European countries. It's something he enjoys and can easily afford. Wojtek is a successful businessman from Krakow. He's practically always in good spirits. In the region area around Tbilisi, everything seems to have a kind of southern flair. But our destination is not the Mediterranean. We're headed to where the mountains are said to be 5,000 meters high. We don't doubt this, but we're so excited we can barely wait to get there. And then, after a right-hand bend, we finally see what we've been waiting for: the Caucasus, a flashpoint region for Russia and at the same time the birthplace of the communist dictator Joseph Stalin. We've already been driving for around 2 hours, but now, as we are near the mountains, our journey truly begins. We'll be accompanied by Veronika and Jagoda as well. 2 girls, or should we say young women, from Warsaw. We're a little skeptical whether they will make it through the mountains, but that's just typical guys talk. Of course we did our homework. The population of Georgia is around 4.5 million, and the country is about as big as Bavaria. The average wage is just a little less than 300 euros. More than once we've had to make our way through herds of sheep. This should be no surprise. Sheep and cattle farming is the only economic activity here. For visitors, however, it may seem unusual to see the animals on the roads. We aren't in India, but the cows here too enjoy the respect of the people. There are around 1 million cows in Georgia, which is more per capita than in Germany, for example. And that's why they have the right of way on the street, a perk they are almost unwilling to give up. We've now made it to the mountains on the only route that leads to the region of Tusheti. It's a path that was carved out only 30 years ago. Back then, the people here got around on horseback or by walking, romantic perhaps, but most certainly exhausting. Chuicha seems to know practically everyone around here. Perhaps it's because people who live under difficult circumstances are simply closer. When it rains, the road quickly softens to mud. And when this happens, the entire region of Tusheti is effectively shut off from the rest of the world. No trucks can get through. Supplies can't make it in or out. The mighty cliffs on each side of the road are a testament to just how much rock had to be detonated to carve out this path. We were told afterwards that many people lost their lives during the construction of this road. There's something wrong with our car, as Schwarz has been forced to stop more than a few times. Perhaps it's the thin air that's hurting the engine. Let's just hope we can keep going. This is my second time in Georgia as a reporter. The first time was more than 20 years ago when the Iron Curtain fell. Things were pretty rough around here back then. Nowadays it's quiet again. It's been 5 years since the war with Russia over Ossetia and Abkhazia, so there's nothing to fear now. The first tourists that we meet are two motorcyclists from the Czech Republic. Not bad. The bumpy ride isn't annoying. If anything, it's amusing. But we're well aware this is just the beginning. And still, we didn't expect to be faced with such steep slopes just yet. Time and again we see rusted utility poles along the road. After the fall of the Soviet Union, there was political chaos and nobody paid any attention to electricity supplies or the cables here. In some areas, nothing has been done since. A mountain stream flowing over the road is nothing out of the ordinary here. There's no money to do anything about it. It's annoying for those who live here, but for us, it's kind of neat. Like traveling back in time. And then something happens that we've been fearing. The engine in our car appears to have given up. We can't exactly make out what the problem is, but it looks at least like Schwarz knows how to fix it. We aren't all that upset. Out of the blue, two workers show up, and Schwarz has his tools out. We must say he looks pretty professional. We aren't going to let anything dampen our good mood. The weather and the landscape are gorgeous, and a little break won't hurt anyone, especially when we've got something to snack on. Another driver stops to see what the problem is. Unfortunately, he can't help. The problem seems to lie with one of the filters. There are no repair shops in the mountains, so we're forced to rely on Schwarz's skill and imagination. And we see right away that he knows what he's doing. You have to be able to think on your feet around here. It's essential for survival. No more than an hour later, we're back in business. The engine is roaring and we can carry on. Dusk begins to fall as we slowly approach our destination. Umalo is the name of the village, and it's one of the centers of the Tusheti region. From a distance we can see a castle, or at least the ruins of one. It's hard to make out with such little light. After 8 hours on the road, we have finally reached our destination. A few stone and wood houses in a shadowed hollow, with an ancient ruin above. At first glance, this village has truly romantic character. We're pleased to have finally arrived. It's time to take a deep breath, stretch our arms and legs, and take in the surroundings. It's quiet in Umalo. We were told the village would be a center for tourism, but we feel like the only foreigners here. Veronica and Jagoda set off immediately to explore the area. It's quite strange how easily we do things here that we wouldn't dare at home, like climbing over an unfamiliar fence. Perhaps it's because the people here are impoverished? This would dawn on me later. At the moment, I was too curious to think about such things. We're in luck. we stumble upon a house where dinner is being prepared. Our unannounced visit certainly came as a surprise, especially with the video camera. But it seems to ring true what we've heard about the people here. Tusheti is a region of friendliness and charity. It turns out we are in exactly the right spot. This is our innkeeper, and the dinner she's preparing is for us.
The dining room is upstairs. This here is the kitchen.
The maid shows us what we'll be eating. Chachapuri, a traditional Georgian dish.
This is curd cheese, butter, and flour. That's all.
We ask one of the innkeeper's friends more about Omalu.
Around 40 families live here during the summer. In winter, when it's really cold with ice and frost, only 11 families stay. Most head down to lower altitudes. There are villages around here where only one single person stays in winter. During Soviet times, we were cut off here, and the people who went down to lower altitudes got used to life there. That's why there are so few people here.
They were forced to move when the Soviet state-owned farms were dissolved, and there was no longer any work up here. Our group is hungry, and it's time for dinner. In the Soviet Union, Georgian cuisine was known as the crème de la crème. Soft white bread, salads, hearty pastries, all finely seasoned. Folklore is an important part of life here. At last, the food is ready. We'll need our strength for tomorrow, when we head into the Georgian mountainside. It only hits me the next morning. We have arrived here in a kind of fantasy world. The entire area has an idyllic atmosphere, enveloped by a kind of serenity. In these parts, life trots at a gentle pace. I attempt to make contact with our horses, but at first they aren't as receptive as the people here. This horse is more welcoming. He's probably a bit older and more experienced. The other one is young. Our guide, Gotcha, mounts our saddles with what looks like a pile of seats, strings and blankets. At first, we are only allowed to watch. It feels like our Georgian guide takes us for spoiled riders. Georgian horses aren't all that big, but they're tough and willing to work. Or so we've been told. So much for a romantic start. Loud, stinking trucks carry the goods that keep things going up here. Without their daily imports, life wouldn't be possible. But soon enough we're off the main road and can let our horses go. We march downhill together. Each day we're going to trek between 30 and 40 kilometers, up and downhill. Even the strongest horse would have problems with that, without a break now and then. We're told only around 4,000 people live in Tusheti during the summer. Each year, some 10,000 tourists come here looking for adventure. The first village we ride into is Shenako, a typical Tusheti hamlet. The houses are centuries old, made of stone and wood. Many are in need of serious work. Right away, I strike up conversation with a villager. The older people here will speak Russian, so I'm able to converse a bit with them. It's different with the younger generation in Tusheti. They've blown off Russian. What is life like here in the mountains? Just great is his instinctive answer. He quickly invites me into his house, and naturally I'm not going to reject. The walls are made of stone, the floor of wood. Only the most necessary furniture.
It's warm here. The flies don't bite.
And where do you sleep?
I sleep here, and he sleeps there.
Apparently someone else lives here.
Up above is a room for guests like you. It's much nicer, of course. This is where I cook and fry my food.
Would you tell me your name?
Eldar.
And your last name? I'm quite taken by his honesty and easygoing nature. When I hear the way he speaks, I think of the cliché, poor but happy. In this instance, there's something to that saying.
Young people don't want to live here anymore. There's not as much comfort. The only people who would want to live here are from our generation. Young people have had enough. They want televisions and all that kind of stuff.
That life's not for him.
Somebody has to be here all year long. Most people head down and come back up, but I stay here. I was born here, and I'll be buried here. Our ancestors lived this way. They always stayed. They never went anywhere. And yes, that's how I want to live.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте, здравствуйте.
Here's another guy like me.
А вы здесь тоже здесь живете, да? Долго?
You live here too? For how long?
I was born and raised here, and I live here.
The neighbor's name is Notari Chachitse, and he wants to show me the guest room the two have built. Not because they want to put me up for the night, they're simply proud of their work. And yet, only seldom do tourists wind up here. Luxury which the builders themselves don't have. Do guests come here? Yes, is the short reply, and those guests are even offered a proper bathroom. Mr. Chachitse then tells us something rather interesting. Behind the village there is a field that is off limits for women. Only men are allowed.
They can't go there to the left, but they can go straight.
So they can go up here on this path?
Yes, that's allowed. They can't go to the left of the path. Left is not okay. Right is okay.
But they can go straight through?
Just not there. They can go everywhere else.
Of course I'm curious to find out the origin of this peculiar tradition. The only problem is they don't have a clue. I asked to meet one of the women here. Perhaps she can tell me more. He leads me to his neighbor. I proceed tactfully. First I ask her about her life here in the village.
I'm only here for the summers.
And where do you go then?
I lived in Moscow for 16 years, then 20 years in Tbilisi, and now I live in Alwani, down in the valley. I come up here in summer.
What do you do here?
I look after my potatoes.
How does it feel to be restricted from certain fields around here?
We've gotten used to it. That's no problem. Not in the least.
Do you know where this tradition comes from?
Oh, I have no idea where it comes from. Our ancestors taught us these rules, and that's the way it is. For the people who live here, it's not a problem at all. We can go where we want, just not that one place. It's really okay.
She then tells us about her father, who is 86 years old, and about her grandfather, who built this house with his own hands over 100 years ago. It's still standing, and that's a form of tradition she's quite proud of. We have to carry on, and finally we start doing some difficult riding. But it's not only about speed. We often have to dismount, and that can be quite difficult, not only for the horses.
Yeah.
Suddenly, there's a bit excitement up ahead. Temo, our guide, tells us to be careful. We have to cross a rushing mountain stream. The only way is for the horses to cross alone. They wouldn't have a chance with us on their backs. To be honest, this is all quite impressive. Our Georgian horses have endurance and a good deal of courage. It's much easier for us. We had locks to help us get across, but still. Back on the mountain paths, I have the image of armed Caucasus soldiers in my mind. Over the past centuries, they must have often traversed paths like these. And on the other side of the border, in Chechnya and Dagestan, the paths taken by Islamist militants must be similar. After a while, we meet two Georgian border troops. It's actually forbidden for them to be filmed, but not every single rule is followed here.
Over there is Dagestan.
And where is Chechnya?
Chechnya is over there.
When you think about it, it's almost impossible to think that so much hate is brewing here, and that there's so much fighting. But I know those are unworldly thoughts. On the border, there is a war memorial showing a Georgian fighter. A fallen hero, perhaps?
It's not a grave. This fighter was killed here and given this memorial. And here we can drink to his memory. Yes, of course. We absolutely must drink to him.
The horses have used our moment of mischief to run off on their own. But for any real Georgian, this is no problem at all. In the vast peaks and valleys of the Caucasus, you can almost hear the echo of the shepherds calling their sheep. And then we arrive in a village where a true surprise awaits us. We find a picture on a shed of the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, born Josep Yugashvili in Gori. Stalin left Georgia for Russia as a young man and would later send many of his former countrymen to the gulags. Unfortunately, there was nobody in the village whom we could ask about the portrait. Most likely, this reverence for the Georgian-born dictator is based on a form of nationalism. However, it remains questionable, if not downright idiotic. The next village we pass appears deserted as well. But this can't be. Wherever there are animals, there must be owners. Still, it appears this village has been abandoned. And then we finally find a woman. It turns out that she has just finished with her annual production of cheese, the last one remaining in the village. In 10 days, her husband will come up here and bring her down into the valley. We kindly request to film inside her home. She leads us into a kind of cavern, her workplace. She is heating only water at the moment, but this is where she produced and stores her cheese. Hundreds of kilograms, a large part of her income. But she's not all alone here. Her 2 younger sons are with her. As a city dweller, I must say I envy their adventurous childhood, roaming the mountains on horseback. Perhaps just another cliché, but certainly an appealing one. Our next stop is Diklu, arguably the most picturesque village in all of Tusheti. It's customary for men to greet each other with a kiss here. Our innkeeper, to my delight, speaks Russian and is a very amenable host. The horses head straight to a place where women aren't allowed. The space around the church ruins is seen as sacred and is reserved only for men. But in reality, this is simply the remains of old tradition. There is nothing sacred here. It's merely a way to connect with long-standing custom. Almost everything here is made of stone. History, so to speak, that's been carved out of rock. Particularly striking are the stone defense towers, where the population once sought refuge from enemy attack. Our innkeeper's kitchen is nothing more than a roofed shed. He's in the process of preparing dinner. Is this all made from scratch?
Yes, pretty much.
Our innkeeper used to be a shepherd, but then he switched gears and opened up his inn with his family. Business is going well. Around 600 people stayed here last year. What's for dinner?
This is ground meat that I'm going to use for a cutlet or strips.
And you can make that?
Indeed. Just hope it tastes good.
It doesn't look all that appetizing just yet, but that's typical for such down-to-earth cuisine. Our innkeeper is a very impressive man. He reminds me more of an intellectual than a shepherd. He shows us his pride and joy, his multifunctional oven. He uses it to heat his house and cook his food. But that's not all.
You can bake bread with it. And last but not least, we make shish kebabs. The charcoal goes in there. The skewers on top, and voila, shish kebabs.
It's a matter of course that the entire family is involved at the inn. They help cook, serve the food and clean the rooms. That's the way things work around here. The food is delicious, at times perhaps a bit too spicy, and the meat in the soup is more like fat, but it all tastes great. And there's no shortage of alcohol either. After we eat, our guide Timo takes me to one of the neighbors. She is one of the last women in the village, he says, who still makes cheese. Of course, I go with him. We enter another draped shed. I must admit, this is truly down to earth. In villages like these, the milk for the cheese is traditionally processed by women. The men are typically down in the valley and come to get their wives only after they are finished with their work. A few kilos of butter have already been produced. And here, says Timo, is the cream. Then we head to the storage room, where the finished cheese is kept for the whole year. A few tons of cheese in sacks, all just simply lying around. But in reality, this is the fruit of a year's work. I wonder what else we can discover in the village, and I set off for a bit of exploring. It can't be that there's nobody else here. But then again, it does seem like everything is deserted and dead. Like these old stones, the basic substance of life in the Caucasus Mountains. But then I find a few guys who are looking around just like me. Excuse me, are you from here?
No, we're from Tbilisi. We deal with the restoration of these old houses. It's our job to give them new life. We have detailed restoration plans so that these houses make it through the winter. Next year we'll begin work on a complete renovation.
To me, all these houses look the same, but that's not the way he sees it.
Just take a look at this roof. It's in a completely dilapidated state. This here is called the dry state.
Is that in good shape?
Yes, it's not bad. But come here and have a look at this. We completely rebuilt this house. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? It's not exactly the traditional style, but I think we've done a good job.
The money for the construction came from the Georgian capital, Tbilisi. On our way out, I see solar panels on some of the housetops, installed with development aid from the Czech Republic. A blend of traditional architecture and high-tech appliance, if nothing else, an interesting mixture. And then I find another villager, not the small sheep, but its owner. He seems very friendly and affable, but there's one thing he cannot stand.
Russia. For me, they're like fascists, chauvinists. I'm no politician, but nobody in the world loves the Russians.
Certainly not you.
No, I've never liked them, even as a child.
Have you ever fought against them?
Not me personally, but my son served in the war in Abkhazia and Ossetia. The Russians are very hard to deal with. They are conquerors, and they exploit small republics, like in the North Caucasus, Chechnya, Ingushetia, and now Ossetia and Abkhazia.
Do Russians ever come here as guests?
Guests? We have no problem with Russian guests. They are the normal people, from Ukraine, from Russia.
And they don't bother you?
No, people are the same everywhere. It's the politicians. They ruin everything.
By the way, the sheep's name is Little Orphan. He no longer has a mother or a father. As we depart, I meet our innkeeper one last time. He is well versed in the history of the surroundings. He recites the names of the villages, and he also knows all about the sacred site, where women aren't allowed.
This is the cross. There are many sacred sites here. Up there, for instance, that's the Makaloi Tower.
Right next to the tower is the old communal court. The elders of the 12 surrounding villages assembled here.
This is where the accuser sat. And the witnesses were here, if there were any. The harshest penalty was banishment. If found guilty, you had to move to another region. You couldn't ever come back here.
We haven't been banished, but it's time for us to carry on our way. This landscape looks like it could be the setting for J.R. Tolkien's fantasy, The Lord of the Rings. Expansive, wild, and sometimes downright mystical. We pass what are probably construction workers waiting to be picked up. Up in these mountains, it's no good to be afraid of heights. And I'm very relieved that our horses are quite the opposite. They're sure-footed and willing to work. It may sound tacky, but it seems to me we've entered a different world, one that fills me with perhaps naive yearning for such a simple, natural existence, regardless of material wealth. It's obvious who wears the pants here. Miss Lamara's in charge at our next stop. Firm yet light-hearted as a child, she leads me into her office. Kitchen and dining room, all under one boarded roof. That's all that's needed here. Her husband worked construction his whole life. The couple is trying to make a little money with the small inn, and it seems to be working. This shower room is the most luxurious one we've seen on our entire tour. The two want to provide us with the most comfort possible. We drink out of Capricorn horns, and by drink I mean chug. And then we learn the most traditional of all Georgian customs. The head of the table proposes a toast just about every minute, to our health, to nature, to women, to just about everything one can drink to. And of course, one of us must drink each time. It's quite a bit in the end, but I'll admit, it doesn't upset the mood. To reject alcohol in a setting like this would be like refusing to shake hands where we're from. And so we drink, as custom would have it. And of course, because it's quite amusing to do as the Georgians do. He sings of the cliffs, the waterfalls, the ice and snow, and naturally from his homeland of Georgia. A home no true Georgian would ever think to give up. And what would an evening like this be without a bit of dancing? Our guide Timo, who is normally reserved, is in top form. And when the master himself shakes down, the evening has officially reached its high point. A bit hungover, yet in good spirits thanks to the fresh wind, we continue on the next morning. By now, we've gained a better sense for what life is like in the Caucasus. If it's true that people are shaped by their surroundings, all Georgians must be angels. And then, at a bridge crossing, Chuicha's horse is hit by a bit of fear. But Chuicha isn't the kind of guy who would violently tug his horse across. He lets others take the lead, to show his mare that the bridge isn't as dangerous as it may have seemed at first. When it comes to showing courage, sometimes humans aren't the only ones with problems. In the end, we all make it across. And then comes the next challenge. We have to traverse a mountain pass at an altitude of 1,500 meters. Parts are so steep that the horses have to take their own path. With a bit of encouragement, anything's possible. And we humans are left with no choice but to copy our four-legged companions. After about an hour, the struggle is over, and we're back in our saddles. The effort was well worth it. The view is quite simply breathtaking. Up here, the wind whistles right past our ears. At this altitude, that should come as no surprise. This is what it looks like in neighboring Chechnya and Dagestan. Now we have an idea of the environment where Islamist separatists, often on horseback, conduct their fight against the Russian military. It's calm here, but I'm aware that war and peace are oftentimes closer knit than you'd think. Like in Wild West, here too the horses roam free. This area is a perfect setting for them. As we descend the other side of the mountain, we come across a small inn. This is a welcome break, following our afternoon exertion. And we're not the only ones happy about to have a little rest. The innkeeper's name is Robinson, and he looks just like what you'd expect from an innkeeper in the mountains. He lives with his wife, son and daughter. We will spend the next couple of nights in this tin sheet and thatch hut. In Soviet times, this was a state-owned farm, a sovkhoz. Today, the 40 cows that graze here belong to Robinson. It surprises me that their daughter Miriami lives here in seclusion with her parents. She studied medicine in Tbilisi, but decided to give that up and return home. We are, of course, served like kings right away, not only with tea, but as we've come to expect, several bottles of alcohol. It seems my Polish friends are rather used to such things. Once again, the alcohol has done its trick. Our hosts are in a truly cheerful mood. I can just picture our ancestors, hundreds of years ago, sitting together through long nights like this. We're all a bit hungover when we take off the next day. We don't know exactly how high up we are right now, but one thing's for certain, we're above the clouds, where freedom seems boundless. And of course, the wind is whistling. The ascent wasn't easy. More than a few of us had our tribulations. I certainly had my share. And now we're going to head down to the valley. Robinson has promised us something special. Down in the valley, we have an idea what Robinson's surprise will be. Together with Gotcha, he gets in the water to show us how Georgian men catch fish. At first, to no avail. After 1 hour, the catch is 1 trout. I have a hunch he wants to prove something to us. They've been at it for hours now. In the meantime, my friends have found other things to do. And then comes Gotcha with the catch. A few trout, I'd say around 10. And the pride in Robinson's face is clear as day. After 4 hours of fishing, we return to our quarters. It's almost midnight. But Gotcha's not going to bed yet. He first has to gut the fish. They're cooked in plain salt water. At the table, we feel like we're on the night shift. We're much more quiet and tired than last night. No alcohol this time around. The trout makes for a real feast, a kind of crowning end to our stay here. The next morning, I persuade Robinson to give an interview. But in front of the camera, to my surprise, he turns a bit shy and tight-lipped. But still, I ask him about earlier times.
During communist times, we weren't allowed to have many animals, only just a few here on the farm. Very few, 1 or 2 cows.
And you were paid by the Sovkhots?
Yes,
And now it's better?
yes, much better.
Will your children stay here?
Our children will stay here, of course. This is very important to us. My father and grandfather lived here, and I too will live here.
Now it's time to leave. I just hope there are no tears shed.
I'm so fond of you all. I have the feeling that you are part of our family.
For me too, it's very difficult to part. Here especially, we've been shown such warmth from people who have invited us to return, and we would, of course, enjoy that.
Dziękuję bardzo. Dziękuję. O. Dzięki. Trzymaj się. Bardzo.
It's almost like in a kitschy movie. The natives stay at home and the journey continues. The weather gods of the Caucasus have been on our side the whole time, and on our day of departure, they give us one more gift. One last sentimental gaze into the valley, as each one of us ponders memories of our trip that will most certainly stay with us for some time to come.
შენი ცხოვრებით გზას მე ვისწორებ